is that California is unfortunately leading in all the wrong indicators as we've seen homelessness continue to spiral out of control. And it was an issue that I spent probably the most time on, particularly my last term as mayor of San Diego, really to try to take aggressive action with one goal. How do we help people? How do we help people get off the streets and get back on their feet for good? I think when you look at the factors that is contributing to that, I think there's absolutely no doubt that we are seeing some of the legislation that has enabled wrong behavior in terms of mental health and addiction. That is a huge issue to it. I think we're seeing too many cities that do not intervene, and I can happy to go into that and help folks. I think you look at things like affordable housing that the state used to have that it cut off completely through redevelopment about 8 years ago. And so you have a variety of factors, again, that is contributing to things getting worse and not better. And one of the things that I stressed was we cannot keep doing things the same way because if you do, it's not going to change. I was proud that when I was mayor, San Diego was the only big city in California where we actually reduced homelessness by double digits. And the unfortunate reality is we've seen it increase by double digits, sometimes many-fold in two or many cities across the state. So I took what I considered to be pretty unique and different action, but again, with one goal. How do we get people off the street?
Yeah, so I was going to ask you about San Diego's success under your leadership. So how did you exactly achieve that? And is it possible that politicians in other cities and counties, first of all, they are willing and they're able to replicate your success?
The answer is yes. We took decisive action in San Diego. Look, I was very frustrated as mayor, and when I saw the back and forth between the city, the county, so many folks saying it's just housing first, et cetera, all of these, buzzwords and nomenclature, but things were getting worse on the street. And so I said, look, I'm tired of the argument and the back and forth. So our streets, I'm mayor, and we need to do something different. So a couple of things that we did in San Diego that I was very proud of. I started a shelter network. I picked the locations myself. And I made a deal with the community. I said, it's going to be cleaner and safer in this neighborhood with this shelter than before it was there. And I had to be able to back that up. And I felt so strongly about it that I created a new division within the San Diego Police Department called the Neighborhood Policing Division, whose sole focus was on quality of life and homelessness. I did not allow tent encampments on the sidewalk while I was mayor of San Diego in my second term. Why? Because we care about people. We care about people enough not to let them kill themselves on our sidewalks and in our streets, in our canyons, in our freeway underpasses. And so I took the fundamental view that we are going to intervene and we are going to give folks a place to go. And so I'm a firm believer that every individual has the right to shelter. I believe that. And I believe that it's our obligation to provide that. But I also believe that when we provide that shelter, that you have an obligation to use it. And I enforced that obligation in San Diego. And you know what? We helped people. We created a network with over 1,000 shelter beds. It wasn't just a bed for the night, but we created an environment that had housing navigation, had mental health, substance abuse, storages, food, showers, all of the rest. Again, to give people that place, a safe, clean, sanitary place to go. But also, as I said, insisting that you can't sleep in front of somebody's house, in front of somebody's business. We're not going to allow you to urinate and defecate in our public spaces and our parks. So I took a very decisive, different view and action than you're seeing, I think, in many cities who allow these tent encampments not only to exist, but to grow because they won't intervene.
Some people who advocate for housing first, their comeback is, well, homeless people, they have a right to sit on the sidewalk. They have a right to be in downtown. They have a right to set up an encampment. So what is your response to that?
You don't have a right to set up an unsanitary encampment in front of somebody's house or business. It's not who we are as Californians. That's not helping individuals. It's enabling, unfortunately, in terms of a system that doesn't allow them to get back on their feet. And so much of this, at least half of the folks that are out there, either have mental health or substance abuse problems. And so again, I'm going to go back to, if you don't intervene, if we don't say we care enough about you, it's not okay for you to live in a tent and do heroin and methamphetamine and kill yourself. We're going to intervene. That's the approach that I took, and I was very upfront about it. And when people saw the difference, when they saw people getting help, when they saw our shelters filling up, people making that transition into that apartment of their own, again, you needed that bridge. And that's what I called it, a bridge shelter.
Shelters in California, they got a bad reputation, right? So there were a group of people who are supporting housing first, and then they say housing is the only solution to end homelessness. But the reality has shown us it's just not enough, and it's too slow, and then we don't have enough time to build all the permanent housing for every homeless individuals. And so can you tell us why we have this housing first mentality in California, and why can we accept, well, shelters might be another solution?
I'm very pro housing. We need to develop more housing in California. And the fact of the matter is, it's the most difficult state in the nation to build it because of so many rules and regulations that this legislature and governors have ignored. It's too difficult, and it takes too long to build housing in California, period. So you can talk about housing first all you want, but if it takes you 7 years to build something, it's not going to work. You're not going to have the ability to help people now. And again, that's why I set up the bridge shelters, which is we're going to set up a system that gives people a place to go now. And it's a bridge. It's a bridge from the street to getting that apartment of your own. And some folks, they need, whether it's first or last month's deposit, they're in between jobs, or some folks are going to need permanent supportive housing, in some cases for the rest of their lives. And so you have to treat each individual as the unique individual that they are and provide that help and support to match that. But again, it's also saying we're not going to allow tent encampments all over our cities, and all of the harm that it does, not only to the individuals, but also to our quality of life in our neighborhoods. I mean, kids need to be able to walk safely to their schools without stepping over needles and feces.
Exactly.
Go to a park. You need to be able to conduct your business. And so for those folks that say, no, that's okay, I just fundamentally disagree. And I disagree because, again, we care about people enough to say, I'm not going to let you kill yourself out here, because that's unfortunately what happens. I'll give you a quick story. And I mentioned this in one of my State of the City speeches about 2 years ago. I was attending a ribbon cutting of an apartment building that had been transformed from a hotel to new apartments for formerly homeless veterans. I'm out there getting ready to do the mayor ribbon thing and all that, talking to folks, and I see a guy who's making a beeline for me, coming out of the new place, and he comes right up to me and says, "You're the mayor, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "I want to say thank you." And I said, "Hey, I appreciate that. I think this is going to be a great spot. I'm proud of our veterans community." He said, "No," he said, "I want to thank you for cleaning up the tents underneath the freeway." He said, "I was one of the people living in those tents." Long story short, his name is Brian, was a Navy veteran, was in construction, lost his job, got addicted to, as he said, doing things that he shouldn't have been doing. But he was in one of those tents. But because we intervened, because we said, "Brian, you have to go to the shelter," we set up one for veterans only in San Diego because we have such a large veterans population. He went there. He got himself clean and sober. He found out that he was eligible for some veterans benefits that he wasn't collecting. Long story short, he is now a peer counselor at this place that we are opening for other veterans who had said, if we hadn't have intervened, if we hadn't have made that difference, he said, I'd probably still be in that tent underneath that freeway. That's what I'm talking about. about taking action, intervening to help people. I believe that is our obligation as city and as a state. And that's why I feel so strongly about this. And I think that story is illustrative of the type of help that we can give to people because we care about you.
For example, in LA, they passed a $1.2 billion bond sale in 2016 to fund more permanent supportive housing. But then only after the project started, they realized it's going to cost way more than they had anticipated. It's going to cost about $400,000 to build one unit. And then that $1.2 billion is just not going to go very far.
Yeah, the reality is, again, it's too expensive and it takes too long to build in California, just straight out. And look, I'm a strong supporter of permanent supportive housing. Made a lot of headway into that in San Diego. But how do you actually make traction, get headway on this? To your point, you have to make it easier to build and you get things done. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I did as mayor is we passed some pretty seminal changes in our development code. We called it complete communities, which is the available to get a permit by right if you wanted to construct multifamily close to transit corridors in San Diego. But it took us over a year and a half to get that through because we had to do a citywide environmental impact report. Why? Because we didn't want individual projects to get stopped like they always do because people use CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, as a weapon to stop projects. I could give you a whole half hour on the need to reform CEQA at the state level because time is money. To your point, in Los Angeles, it takes too long. If we do not fundamentally reform and make it easier to construct and to build, you're not going to move the needle. So we took it into our own hands in San Diego. Again, we said, we're going to do a citywide environmental impact report. We're going to allow you to come in if you want to do multifamily. We're going to increase the density in zoning close to our transit-oriented areas because that's where you want it to begin with one goal: how do we make it easier and faster to actually get things built? It's a model program that is working. And again, it had bipartisan support, Democrats, Republicans. And I should mention, when we talk about all of these issues, these are not partisan issues. All of the reforms and changes that we are talking about here today that we were able to do in San Diego, we did with a Republican mayor and a majority city council, a majority Democrat city council. Again, I'm a big believer in this is common sense. It's not about partisanship. And let's actually take action with the word on action, not rhetoric, to get things done differently.
Do you receive any pushback from local residents because of the NIMBY movement?
You can, and we often did. But again, one of the reasons why we did it, and we did it citywide, which is to say, let's have that debate of where we want the growth and development. And probably just important, where don't we want it? Doesn't make sense, on the outskirts of the city, not close to our trolley in San Diego or major rapid bus corridors, but it does make sense in some of the urban sections of San Diego, and again, close to our transit priority areas. And so that's why we really focused on that, and to say, okay, if we can agree on that and get that through, again, our city council, which we did, then let's say you should be able to come in and get a permit over the counter by right. Again, because we want people to construct housing. If we don't increase the supply, we're never going to make it more affordable for Californians and for families, for our kids, to actually be able to afford to stay here. And what we're seeing is quite the opposite, of course, as California is the most expensive state in the nation, and people are leaving our state. For the first time, we lost a population last year, lost a congressional seat because it's too expensive. People are voting with their feet. They're leaving. And so if we don't make some fundamental changes to how expensive it is to live here, we don't make fundamental changes to our quality of life on the issues like homelessness and housing, we're going to see that exodus continue. I believe we can turn it around. I believe that the things that we are talking about from this policy perspective and the changes that I so strongly believe in are changes that Californians want to see. And I think you can see it all across the state.
So I talked with a lot of government officials at the county level, at the state level, and I feel they're just all very dedicated people, very compassionate on solving the homelessness issue in California. Then my question is, how can we have so many good people, dedicated people, working on one problem for so long and not getting anywhere?
Yeah, we have great people all across our state working on this very important issue. One word that's lacking: leadership. We have not had the leadership at the top to make the changes. We've had a bunch of cities and counties doing things differently. As I've said before, we had cities arguing with the counties who was responsible, et cetera. That's why I strongly believe that this needs to be a statewide issue at the statewide level from the governor's office that says we are going to take a leadership role and not allowing the finger pointing. We're going to set standards. We're going to incorporate the view of right to shelter and obligation to use it. We're going to change some of the misguided legislation out there that is contributing to the rise in crime and to the addiction of homelessness, like Prop 47 and some other issues, where somebody can come out now and do heroin and methamphetamine on the street, and it's a misdemeanor, no longer a felony that causes you to go to drug court and to try to get sober. Drug courts have completely dried up in California. That's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have some pretty strong feelings. It's about leadership that says we're going to come in, we're going to have statewide standards. And again, we're going to have I believe you need to have a governor that's going to say this is a statewide issue, not leave it to county by county.
You talked about Prop 47. So do you think there's any prospect we may repeal that?
Californians are angry, beyond angry. They're pissed. The fact that you can walk into a store and steal $950 worth of merchandise with no consequences. You can go right out and do heroin and methamphetamine with the same no consequences. That's crazy. And we're seeing, again, that type of disorder pervade as we're seeing rising crime throughout California with no consequences for actions. Seeing all the smash and grabs. We're seeing train robberies now in Los Angeles. Look, there has to be consequences for actions. And so when we look at, some of this misguided legislation and voter propositions that, had very false, titles and summaries about what they were supposed to do, Californians now understand that Prop 47 isn't working. They want to see that change. And I think what you're seeing is, finally, you're starting to see some politicians that are giving the rhetoric that they want to see change. But until you actually change the policy and the action that says, it's not okay to do this, we're not going to see the real change.
In 2021 holiday shopping season, we saw organized robberies in the Bay Area shopping malls, including the Stanford shopping mall. So, we at the same time, we also see a lot of protests saying defund the police. It does not make any sense to me. So why do we have this conflict?
You're obviously a smart person and has some common sense. Of course, you don't want to defund your police departments. Where I'm sitting right now in my living room, if you outside the windows right behind me, year and a half ago, while I was still mayor, I had hundreds of protesters outside my house every single night, bullhorns yelling at me, yelling at my family, every name in the book, screaming, defund the police. I didn't defund the police. I increased the police budget. And I got that increase through a supermajority Democrat city council. Why? Because I stood up and I said, if we don't have a safe city, we don't have anything. We want safe neighborhoods. If you want, job creation, if you want your kids to be able to walk to school, it needs to be safe. And we better darn well give the men and women that wear the badge the best tools, resources, and training to be successful. And that costs money. And for all of my other former, other mayors that came out and said, oh yeah, we're going to defund our police because it seems like the thing to do this month. Guess what they're all doing right now? They're all putting money back into their budgets because the crime is spiraling and skyrocketing out of control. What a crazy thing that you saw folks coming out saying, let's defund our police departments. That's the type of common sense, again, where I'm going to keep on coming back to. You have to have the political will and the leadership to say, this is what we will accept and this is what we won't accept, and be able to stand up and talk about that. And that's what I did as mayor when we got that budget through and that vote. And I said, we are going to continue the policing reforms that we're doing in San Diego that I'm very proud of. We were the first big city in the country that adopted body-worn cameras. We made some of the changes in terms of duty to intervene with officers. We can go down the list. But we were also the safest big city in America. We're the 8th largest city in America. And how you're the safest big city is you have to have that community trust and support with your police department. And again, you have to have a department that has the training, tools, and resources to be successful. When you stop that, you start defunding that, you're not going to have a safe city and you're not going to have a safe state. Unfortunately, we had to see, and what we're seeing for some of these other cities to realize that over the last year and a half. But there are still people today that are saying, no, we want to reimagine, and we want to, all these other buzzwords that make absolutely no sense. We need to keep our neighborhoods safe. We need to make sure that we have, as I said, the men and women out there that have great training, have common sense, and we're going to invest in them to do that. If you do not have safe cities, you don't have anything.
Great. I have 2 young boys, and now I dare not to take them to San Francisco for museums or concerts anymore, because I just worried about walking through a certain neighborhood, and you never know.
And that is terrible to hear. You're not the only one.
Yeah.
San Francisco is a fantastic, great place.
Yeah.
Yet to see what's happened to that city, to see what's happening in Los Angeles, to see what's happening up and down. Again, no consequences for actions, and folks that will stand up and give you a bunch of rhetoric, but won't actually take action. I took action as mayor. And before COVID hit, we had about 13 other different cities from around the country that came to tour and look at the shelter system that we had set up, to look at our neighborhood policing division, to look at the partnership we worked with other nonprofit organizations. We created an ecosystem that says, we're going to get you off the street. We're going to get you a clean, safe place to go. And then we're going to transition you into that apartment of your own. That takes work. That takes, pounding on the table sometimes and using the full power of your office as mayor and just saying, we're not going to accept the status quo where everybody just points their fingers and it gets worse. I knew there was a lot of San Diegans that supported not defunding the police. I knew it was crazy. Look, and again, I'm going to go back to, just because you have, a couple hundred protesters, you have the right to do that. But I also have the right to use common sense and say, we're not going to do that in San Diego. And when I saw that support, again, all across the political spectrum, very diverse neighborhoods saying, no, we want police reform, but we want when you dial 911 that the police to be here. I mean, that's just that's what you have to have. And so, again, I'm going to go back to political will. It says you can have that view, as wrong as it is. I'm not going to cave to that, because I took swore an oath to protect this city, to do what I thought was right. And that's what I did. And so you cannot allow yourself, again, to be, swayed by what some people think is the politically correct thing to do of the month. Boy, you start going down that path, you're never going to get that back. And again, what are all these mayors doing right now? They can't put money in their police department budgets fast enough, but they lost 2 years. They lost 2 years of doing the right thing, of putting in resources, strengthening those community ties, funding, giving the tools and the training. And I just shake my head, because that's not who we are as Californians. And I think it's important for those of us who believe that to stand up and say it loudly in terms of what is the right thing to do.
We saw California is such a beautiful state and people are nice. So why, after so many decades, we are still lacking the right leadership?
Well, I'm going to go back to see, these misguided policies that we've got out of Sacramento. There's not a competition of ideas. One party rule is not working for our state. And when you have that, and when you have folks that continue to, espouse philosophies, it's not even Republican or Democrat, it's the far left. It's some of the most crazy stuff that I just think doesn't make any sense. You know, defunding the police, and we can go on and on. Again, no consequences for actions. And so when we continue to see those policies, and some folks say, yeah, that they support it, but then we see the results of those. We see the results of what's happening on the street. You can see it with your eyes. You can see it with your eyes on homelessness. You can see it and feel it on crime. You can see it when companies are saying it's too expensive to live here. I'm moving my company to another state. You can see it when families say, I can't raise my kids here anymore, and I got both parents working. We're going to move to another state. And so at some point, folks say, this is not working. You've got to be able to say, no, these policies are having the exact wrong impact on California. And if we don't change it, it's going to continue to get worse. Well, I think people are seeing the results of these policies. And again, I think they're angry, they're frustrated, and they're ready for a change. You know, I'm Republican, in the city of San Diego, we only have 24% of our registered voters are Republican. I won with 54% of the vote and got reelected with 58% of the vote. How do you win? You win by building coalitions based upon common sense and action. So yes, Republicans, but yes, independents and Democrats, because I said, this is my vision of San Diego, and I'm going to be a mayor that's going to actually take action on these things, on infrastructure, on homelessness, and go on down the list, crime. But people want that. And I think that's who we are in California. And to be successful, you have to be able to articulate what we should be doing differently, lay out those policies, because people, I strongly believe, you know, as I said, Democrats in San Francisco don't like what's going on with their great city. Independents don't, Republicans don't. All of these issues are getting so bad that they're transcending partisan politics. What people want is a leader who's going to come in and say, enough's enough. We're going to make some changes. And they don't care if you have an R or a D next to your name. They want to know if you're going to take action. I think that's where we are in California.
Right. So can you tell us a little bit more about mental health and drug addiction?
Yeah, it's huge. It's a huge factor. And again, people know it. They see it with their own eyes. I mean, yes, it's housing. Of course it is. Do we need to construct more of it? Of course we do. But to turn a blind eye to say what's going on when it comes to mental health, which is completely broken in California. That system is absolutely broken, and we need statewide reform and an approach to do that. Again, because we have to intervene and help people that are not in the position to help themselves. But the reality is, if you allow tent encampments, if you allow folks to self-medicate with heroin and methamphetamine, you're never going to break that cycle. And that's why I felt it was so incredibly important. And I had some of the best providers in San Diego that joined me that says, no, we're going to intervene. We're not going to let you do that. Again, back to my story on Brian, who said if we didn't intervene, he'd still be in a tent, still be out doing, you know, methamphetamine underneath the freeway. That's why we need to break that cycle. Why? Because we want people to get back on their feet. We want them to get clean and sober. We want them to be able to function and get that place of their own. And we want to give people the help and the support that have some of the mental health issues that, again, gets them that treatment. And it's long lasting treatment, not just 48-hour hold and, you know, county mental health, to actually have a program to keep you stabilized.
So we know in 2004, California passed the Mental Health Services Act, which levies 1% income tax on personal income of millionaires, basically. So it's originally was designed to transform California's behavioral health system to better serve people with serious mental health issues. So it's been like 20 years, right? Almost 20 years since the passing of the act. Why are we not seeing any improvements in the number of psychiatric facilities and psychiatric beds?
Well, I think you're right. And, you know, we need to have an absolute audit of those funds in that program to make sure the dollars are actually going to help people and not just different types of programs all across, you know, the counties that don't actually get to the causes and the help that people need. We need more psychiatric beds. We need more step-down facilities. We do. And again, you have to have the leadership that says we're going to build them, we're going to construct them, and we're going to insist that folks use them. And we have such a shortage of psychiatric beds in California. Again, I strongly believe we need to make sure and do an audit of those funds and make sure the funds are actually going to help people get off the street and not kind of weird, county wellness programs or, other things that don't actually help people and keep them off the street for good. It's about leadership, and it's about saying it's incredibly important. We're spending lots of money. And to your point, what are the metrics? What are the accountability? Get a report and said, what have you done with it? What we saw is a lot of counties were stockpiling that money. They weren't using it, or they were spending it at all kinds of different things. If you don't have a very clear roadmap, which says, here's what we're going to do to spend it, and a governor that's going to stand up and say, this is one of the most important things we have to do if we really want to make a dent in homelessness, it's not going to change.
In November 2021, New York City opened up the nation's first supervised drug injection site. So do you think California would and should follow suit?
No, it's not about, enabling folks. It's about getting people to help so they get clean and sober and get off heroin and methamphetamine. Again, to say, allow you to stay in a tent encampment where you can do that and kill yourself, I fundamentally disagree with that. We're better than that as Californians. We care about folks. We care about you enough that says, hey, I want to get you inside. I want to get you stabilized. I want to help you get clean and sober. I don't want to enable you to live out in a tent and kill yourself. It's the wrong approach.
And Governor Newsom tweeted, doctors should be able to write prescriptions for housing the same way they do for insulin or antibiotics. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think the governor's completely failed when it's come to housing production in California. That's the reality. Promised all the creation of these hundreds of thousands of units that aren't happening. Again, why? Because he fundamentally has not made the policy changes to allow construction of housing easier in California. He hasn't come out to make the CEQA changes, to drive home the policy changes at the legislature. Again, you can have all the happy talk and rhetoric you want, but if you don't actually make it easier to construct housing, it's not going to happen. And that's why it's been, again, a big failure throughout the state. Why I had to take matters into my own hands as mayor, again, to do a citywide complete communities program, environmental impact report. The state should be a partner in making it easier, not putting up roadblocks and legislation that allow projects to be sued for all of the wrong reasons that'll keep a project on hold sometimes for 5 to 7 years. That's crazy. If you want to talk about constructing more housing, you have to make it easier to do so. And you have to change the policy to allow that to happen. California has the worst policies, the most obstructive policies that do not allow for the creation of housing. That's why it's so expensive. And so you can talk about writing a prescription, you can talk about whatever you want. But if you actually don't roll up your sleeves and make the changes, it's not going to happen. And what did the state do 8 years ago? The state ended the redevelopment program. That was the #1 state program that provided dollars for affordable housing to cities. And they ended it during a supposed budget shortfall. And what are we seeing right now? Tens of billions of dollars of budget surplus. But we're not getting that money back to the cities for affordable housing. Instead, the state's on a spending spree for, God knows what. And so I'm going to keep coming back to, if you do not make it easier to construct housing and have the legislation that makes it more efficient, more affordable, and gives you the timing that you need, we're not going to see the changes that families so desperately need to be able to afford to live here.
Thank you so much. This is great.
Thank you for having me. Happy to help and be a part of it. And look